Hello everyone. Super excited today because we have, as you can see, many more people than usual. And so yeah, today, as we announced on social media, on the Meetup page, everywhere we could, is a special episode, as you can guess. So we won't be live coding. At least it's not planned. You will never know. Maybe someone will start wildly screen sharing and coding furiously, but that's not what we plan. But who knows? Who knows what can happen in the next hour? And so today, yeah, as you have guessed, I am privileged to be in the company of some of the most prominent PHP members of the Neo4j community. And yeah, so PHP, just to tell my life that nobody cares about. I, my first job actually was with PHP, so it was more than 10 years ago. I think at the time the most recent version was PHP 5.3, and that's probably where my PHP knowledge stops. So it's a dated PHP knowledge from 10 years ago. So there are many things I don't know, or I've from a distance learned about it. But PHP will always have a special place in my heart because that's really accompanied me during my studies. I know many people from my generation around me also did lots of programming and learned programming with PHP. And in this, the language is here to stay, right? As I said, over the last 10 years, so many things have changed, and for the better, right? The language keeps improving. It has now an official specification, etc., etc. So really, I love PHP, even though I don't practice PHP so much anymore. And yeah, so that's why I always have a special suit for PHP, and I was super happy to have the live stream with Glenn up until last week. Right, we've done 8 episodes on the PHP client that Glenn maintained, which is built on top of Michal's Bolt library. And we also had a special guest with Abed because he worked on new Eloquent, which is graph, relational mapping, but graph mapping in that case, with that integrates with Symfony, if I remember well. And then we also have Marin here, who works on Cypher DSL. So you might know Cypher DSL from the Java world, but there is also an equivalent in PHP thanks to Marin. And I will let them introduce themselves anyway. Like where they're from, because that's always interesting. I think we have various countries represented today. What's their story with PHP, what's their story with Neo4j, and how they came about working on the projects they currently work on. I mentioned a few of them. And as for me, I started telling my life without even introducing myself. So my name is Florent. I work in the drivers team on the Go driver specifically, and I also try to help as best as I can community of driver authors and driver integrators. But that's the boring part. The most interesting part now is with our guests. So I don't know which order we should pick, but yeah, can you all introduce yourself a little bit? So I don't know. I'm just gonna pick randomly. Really randomly. Marin, would you like to start?
Sure. My name is Marien, of Marijn, how you say it in Dutch. I'm from the Netherlands, and I'm the main developer of the PHP Cypher DSL. So I think Cypher has a couple of DSLs currently implemented, one in Scala, one in Java. The Java is, I think, the official Neo4j implementation for the DSL, and I made an implementation for a DSL in PHP. I got started on that project because at our company where I work, Wikibase Solutions, we wanted to develop an extension for MediaWiki, which is written in PHP that uses Neo4j, but there was no proper way to build queries in PHP for Cypher yet. So I was tasked with developing a library to do that, which is now grown quite big, and I think it supports most features of Cypher at the moment. Yeah, so that's why I started developing and working on the Cypher DSL. That's basically it for me,
And,
I think.
and so, what brought you to PHP first, right? And what brought you
Right.
to Neo4j later? What's your story there?
Yeah, so it's quite an interesting story actually. I was I was a Wikipedia moderator for a couple of years, and that's when Wikibase Solutions, the company where I currently work, recruited me. And well, MediaWiki is written in PHP, so I was tasked with developing extensions for MediaWiki, and that's basically how I learned most of the knowledge I currently have of PHP. And yeah, well, like I said, then I got introduced to Neo4j because my boss wanted to create an extension that uses Neo4j as a backend. That's basically how I got to know Neo4j.
Nice. Yeah, that's super interesting. Thank you. So I will just remind the audience if they want to ask questions, please do so. That's the whole point. You have, all these PHP experts in front of you. So feel free to ask any questions to them while we know we're warming up, right? We are each introducing ourselves. So in the meantime, if you can think of questions, of course, don't be shy. Just ask away, and I will forward them. So let me pick randomly again. Let's move on to Michal.
Uh, okay. My story behind the PHP and me. I learned a PHP when I was 12 in 2 days.
That's young.
I
Interesting.
yeah, I already knew Basic and some of Pascal, and I wanted to learn how to make websites, and I learned just PHP. I said, why not? And here I am. And after I was on the high school, when I was 15, 16, I was programming some stuff in PHP mostly for one company in capital city of Slovakia, because I'm originally from Slovakia. And I was developing some websites for them as a high school student. It was like a contract job. And after the high school, I started working with PHP in my professional life. And I worked with PHP like all my life. Besides of that, I worked with C Sharp, and I was working with some Java and Node.js and other programming languages. And also uh, I had some like breaks because I was doing something else, like programming robots or AI in Python or some other stuff. But yeah, the PHP is still with me all my life. And it was quite a journey because the development of PHP was really nice. They introduced a lot of great improvements and optimizations. I really like PHP, and now after the 8, also the 7 and 8 were released, I always like to come back to the PHP and work with that language. It's really friendly and very practical. And the Neo4j story, I was on conference in Brno in Czech Republic in, let me check, 2014. I have a t-shirt from that. And at that conference, there was one speech about Neo4j and graph databases. And first time when I was sitting there, it was a first time hearing about that, and I was really impressed about this kind of access to the database or the architecture of the database. And I was looking forward to use or learn how to use it and have a project to use that database. And that thought I had in my head in many years. And after, I think it was around 2019, I think, or 18, probably. I'm not sure. I finally had the opportunity. That means 4 or 5 years later. I was introduced to one project, and it was like a new project. They wanted to create a system for administrating the employee rights for the internal company systems, and also for receiving the hardware and everything, like inventory of the company, but not only inventory, also access to the internet and all this software stuff. And we wanted to create this project also with internal scripts to auto configure everything what is possible to configure. And when we were thinking about this and mindstorming the idea how to create this database, we had this white board and drawing the graph on it. And when we had this, I was looking at that and I was like, okay, this is the graph database. That's what we need. And that was the moment I decided to use the Neo4j in that project, and it was great. It was exactly what we needed, and the Neo4j, it's the best database I ever used, and I used a lot of different databases in my life. But right now, it's always hard to get to other database than Neo4j. It completely changed my excitement from programming. The Neo4j is great in this way. But the one big issue at the start was there was a driver for connecting PHP and Neo4j database. And the driver was obsolete. It was from GraphAware company, or I don't know what it is. And it was
GraphAware,
not
yes.
what?
GraphAware indeed, yeah, is a
Yeah.
partner. Is still a partner, by the way. They still do many great things, but they don't
Okay.
they don't maintain
And
GraphAware anymore.
yeah, it was not maintained, and they had super only for the oldest first database, and it was not completely compatible with the newest version, and it was problem. And I was looking on the old driver how it works. I was looking on some unofficial documentation of the protocol for the communication. The protocol is called Bolt. And I was looking on the unofficial documentation and I was thinking about, I think I can program this. I can do this. I was really deciding it shouldn't be a problem to program a library to communicate over the Bolt protocol with database in binary and all this packing and unpacking data. And I was like, I can do it. And I was programming. This is funny. At that time I didn't have a car and I was traveling to the work with a bus, which took me a lot of time. And I bought a notebook. I didn't have a notebook. I bought a notebook for that. And I was driving a Bolt library in bus while driving to the work and from the work because it was my personal project.
So you
And
were being driven to write a driver. That's interesting. That's
yes,
rare.
and during this development, I also had to analyze the binary communication with the database because the Bolt documentation was not official, it was not complete, and everything. And I was analyzing the binary communication with the database, and I had printed. I still have the papers somewhere here. I had printed the binary communication in hexadecimal codes, and I mark with pencil what means and reading the data. And I after I don't know maybe 2 weeks, I was in a state I was able to read the binary documentation with the Neo4j database. I was completely understanding what's going on every time. It was so funny. and and then I had the Bolt driver, which was amazing. We started using that in the work. I released the driver on GitHub as open source. And later, the Neo4j finally released official documentation, and I was able to improve the driver to fulfill all the documentation stuff and official stuff. It was great. It was great journey, and I really like that. And now I still keep up the Bolt library and trying to add everything what is officially supported. Okay, that's probably all.
Thanks. And actually, if you had you not done that, I think the situation for the community would be much more different today. Like before you took the effort, I think some people started forking. So some of the old driver did a few changes here and there, but it was very fragmented.
Yeah,
And I know we'll probably come to that when Glenn tells his story. So I'm not going to spoil too much, but
I can say
the way events happened really made it so that I mean we're in a much better situation now than we were maybe 1 year and a half or 2 years ago even. So, and that's thanks partly to you. I mean, to the efforts you were describing, right? To going back with incomplete documentation, with an old driver, trying to figure out how the communication works, etc. So all these efforts led to what we have today, right? Which is like almost a rebirth of the PHP community in a way. And so it's so we cannot be grateful enough for what you've done there. For I mean, that also applies to everyone in this room, right? All the efforts are also being shared to the community, and everyone can benefit from that now. So yes, thanks again, Michal and everyone actually.
It feels like the Bolt library driver is foundation stone of the PHP community for this.
It is.
I mean, that's true. Yeah, if you remove that, the PHP client, I mean, we support HTTP, but you won't have Bolt, so you won't have Aura, so it will be much more limited. So
the HTTP you mentioned, that was one of the reasons why I was programming the driver for Bolt, because you can use the HTTP API, which is great, but it's slow because it's HTTP protocol. And I wanted to use the socket communication, which is way faster.
Yep, makes sense. All right, so let's move on to Glenn, right? That's just how the Neo4j story, at least. That's a logical order. Then we'll go to Abed to conclude the introduction part and then start moving to the question. So Glenn, please tell us your PHP and Neo4j story.
Yeah, in a way, it's going more and more abstractly. We started with just the Cypher language, and then the Bolt protocol, and now I'm gonna talk about the driver, and we'll end with a big integration with Laravel. So, yeah, so I started the work on the driver because I'm the driver maintainer mainly, or the client. I started working on it because let me go back a little bit. I started to work with Neo4j when I went to FOSDEM. I was working on a small project where we needed to store books, and books are structured in like a special as a tree. So you have a book that has chapters. That chapters might have subchapters. Like it becomes a tree like that. And we stored all these parts in a database, in a SQL database, which became really slow because the books that we had could go like 8 levels deep. So that's 8 joins. So that didn't work out. So I just went on a hunch just to export stuff to FOSDEM a couple of years ago. And that's where I came across Neo4j. And I remember seeing like the query language of Cypher, where it's like ASCII art almost. And that really clicked. I really vibed. So I really wanted to get started. And that's when I realized that GraphAware library didn't work anymore. So that's how I started working on it. I found Michal's work. So basically, what I did was I took his work. I built on top of that more abstractions, and that's what now became the driver. So it has like auto routing. Some error handling. It also supports the HTTP protocol, stuff like that. So like it's really handy in that regard. And it's really closely related to the official drivers that Neo4j supports in other languages. That's like the main focus, but it's also relatively compatible with the GraphAware version. So migrating between those shouldn't be too difficult. So yeah. That's essentially the story.
Thank you. So let's move on to Abed, last but not least. So Abed, can you tell us about yourself, your PHP and Neo4j story as well?
Of course. I'll start with the PHP story. I think I was around 18 years old, and I had a band. And I had already decided to enter, to get into computer science at the university. So being that person who was the most knowledgeable on the computer side among the band members, I decided to volunteer to build the website for the band. So I went to the nearest library back then. I don't know if they call it library. It sold more CDs than books, but that's what they called it. And I went there and told them, I want to learn programming. What CDs do you have to learn any kind of programming language? And they handed me a PHP MySQL CD, because back then we used to think they're sisters. They are inseparable, PHP and MySQL. So I learned these two and built the website back then, and and since then, actually, I've been using PHP in every kind of project. Of course, freelancing a lot. Some companies I worked at, some projects that didn't see the sunlight, but others that did back then, and they were all, of course, PHP Mysql, because this is what we've learned up until I joined the company where I'm a CTO right now, Vine Lab. We were building a social media platform that for celebrities that brought exclusive news content where also users could generate content as well and interact and communicate. You know, the regular person follows person. There's content and there's all sorts of things. So I modeled the database for that project, of course, using a relational database back then. And at the beginning, like at the initial model looked scary. I almost didn't want to implement it. So I started researching, trying to find ways to learn more about the ecosystem and learn more about what other social media platforms are doing. So I learned from Facebook that there's this notion of something called a graph. I had no idea. That was around 2013 or 2014, around these years. So I started looking, and I had 2 or 3 candidates. Neo4j was one of them. And actually, Neo4j was the only one that implemented graphs natively. The others had a graph layer on top of any other type, be it a document or a relational database. So that was one of the first reasons why I dug deep into Neo4j, up until I reached the Cypher querying language. I saw the other querying languages. I don't remember really their names, but as soon as I saw Cypher, I had to like take a step back in my chair and think how astonishing that language was, because back then it was a revelation. The language itself was expressive, and I was at the time when I was working and still using Laravel framework, and the Laravel framework is all built on the notion of things being expressive, things being simple, things the code is impersonating think. And Graph Database, Neo4j, did that exactly the same way. And Cypher language took it even further. Because, you know, the parentheses for nodes that are circular, the relationships with the arrows and the direction is also decided by the arrow, and the square braces decided the label. That was completely natural. It felt like a second nature to the database, and it felt also a second nature to how you think about data and how you would want to navigate this database. Up until I reached the point where I wanted to integrate Neo4j with PHP in a Laravel project, which was back then that platform. It felt a little lonely in there, because there was only that driver that Michal was talking about, and even it wasn't even GraphAware at the time. It was Christoph. I don't know if he's with us right now, but he's with GraphAware right now. And I don't think he's maintaining PHP anymore. But back then, he was the sole maintainer of the Graph database driver. So I got in contact with him, and together we were trying to build something. So yeah, it felt lonely up until you guys came along. And that's why I'm really, really happy that you guys are here now. And of course, back then, it was a different PHP than the PHP that we know today. The PHP we know today is closer to a language that we all love to work on. Of course, we did love it back then, but we knew that it had a lot of shortcomings. We needed the data type in PHP. We always wanted it. We needed an enum. We needed so many data types in the language that did not exist back then. But right now, and seeing how everything is being refreshed, being rewritten, it's like a breath of fresh air, completely new. And it got me motivated even more to continue and maintain the library that's called Neo-Eloquent, which is basically Eloquent, the Laravel ORM, but it's more of an OGM, object graph mapper. Because also the working with Eloquent was always extremely easy. And funny enough, the way you write functions and relationships in Eloquent, I don't know if Glenn, you felt that way as well, but it feels also similar to how Cypher feels to navigate the graph. So from a coding perspective, it felt the same.
Yeah, indeed. It's like the strongest part of Eloquent on Laravel was how easy it is to have all these relationships predefined in the code. So it's only natural that an actual relationship-based database worked with it. So yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah, so that's why I was keen on bringing that that knowledge everywhere, and I also volunteered for a very long time back then when there was an ecosystem building up around Neo4j here in my region. I forgot to mention that I'm Lebanese in Lebanon right now. And in the area and the region even, there was no, very little knowledge and adoption of Neo4j. So I wanted, as much as Neo4j solved a problem for me, I wanted it to solve, and I knew that it would solve a lot of other startups and other established companies, enterprises problems here as well. So I started volunteering as a meetup host here in my local area and anywhere else in the MENA region as well. So that's, in brief, my journey with PHP and Neo4j.
Cool. Thanks for sharing. I mean, really interesting stories overall. So thanks all of you for sharing. And so we have for now one question from the audience. So this time I won't dictate any order. You don't have to all answer if you don't feel like it. I will. I mean, if everyone talks at the same time, then I will try to moderate. But I also rely on you all to kind of agree on who talks first. So let me highlight the questions. So probably a daft question. Spoiler alert, no question is daft, so it's not a daft question. I can already answer that. Is it straightforward to convert an existing PHP code for a simple website from MySQL to Neo4j? And that gives me some memories, of the typical PHP MySQL file, which does everything, right? You connect to MySQL, then print out some HTML. That was, maybe it's still used that way today. I don't know, but yeah, can Neo4j, even replace, that's almost a love relationship between PHP and MySQL, at least back in the day. So wonder how. Yeah, that's a very good question. Like, how is the story if we want to move from that? I mean, obviously, I gave very simplistic example, but like how easy, in your opinion, is it to move from PHP MySQL to PHP Neo4j? So who wants to take it?
I can answer, or I can share my expertise.
Go ahead. Yes.
I had a similar project. I was migrating from MySQL to Neo4j, and usually in the project you have some framework, or I hopefully you have, and in the framework you usually have a database layer, and you use this database layer for all the communication. And I had also database layer, and I just opened the database file, and I deleted all the code from there. Only I left the function names and the function initializations with parameters, no content on functions. And I just added the communication through the Bolt library to these functions, which I solved the migrating from old MySQL to new Neo4j. But still, I had to rewrite all the SQL queries into Cypher queries. But this way, I solved a problem with changing any functions or anything. Everything was same this way. And this way, I also created a Neo4j class, which I'm using in many projects. And this Neo4j class is just a wrapper over the Bolt library. It's very simple. There is just a query and reset or some of these base function you usually need, because you usually don't need any great stuff like Glenn made for Bolt client, the PHP client, which is like routing tables and everything, because usually you have the local instance of the database and you just need to connect, get the data, and that's everything you need. And I made this wrapper. It's also available on my GitHub, and it's simple and it does exactly what person needs.
Thanks, Michal. So the do others, yeah, Abed, go ahead, please.
Sure. So I would split this question into two parts. The first part is to transform the data that is in SQL into Neo4j data, and I think there are plenty of ways that make it extremely easy to do that, be it through export, import, and other ways. I think, Florent, you can highlight these later on, probably. But when it comes to code specifically, as Michel mentioned, it depends on how you're writing, how you're structuring. If you're working with vanilla PHP, it's already you already have a database. You already have your classes. You're querying functions. You would probably have the same effort to rewrite the queries in raw, call the database, receive that in the SQL keyword. It would be rows of data, and then you would parse that into objects or any other results that you would want to display. Otherwise, if you're using a framework and that framework doesn't have a native or some sort of a specified way of dealing with databases, you probably have some sort of a structure, like a repository pattern, for example, that you would use. And in that repository pattern, you would have an interface that is being implemented by a repository class, and this class would query and return hopefully some sort of a DTO, the data transfer objects that you would use in your entire application. With that, all you have to do is implement another concrete for that interface that is a repository that implements Neo4j, similar to the one that implements SQL, and then you would return the same DTOs from Neo4j.
Thanks. Any others want to add their perspective on that question? Or shall we move on?
Yeah, a little bit. I don't know if Abed really mentioned it, but if you are just using Laravel, it's just gonna be changing. It's just gonna be installing a different package, and it's gonna work. Of course, you still need to migrate the data over. There are some great resources for that. Yes, really quite a few resources on that on Neo4j itself to guide you through that. It usually involves exporting to CSV files and then importing it back again. So it becomes relatively trivial. And then, of course, there is no way around it if you're not using Laravel or something like that. Rewriting the queries is going to be the biggest part of that. So what is the biggest advantage of one of the biggest advantages of Neo4j is Cypher. But that also means that you have to migrate to Cypher. So depending on the size of the project, I'm always a big fan of small incremental changes. Don't sweat it too much if the project is too big. Try, for example, doing like one of doing a recommendation engine or something. I don't know your story, but there might be something that is really valuable to you that is better fitted for Neo4j, for a graph database, and just try to focus on just that to get to know the library, and then you can see if that works and start migrating another part, like the users or something like that. I think that is one of the best ways to go about these really big changes, in my opinion.
All right. Marijn, do you want also to add something?
No, I don't really have anything to say. It's not something that I deal with, like for the DSL. It's more for the higher level, probably.
Were you lucky enough to get started with Neo4j from the start?
Are you asking me? Or
Yes. Yeah.
So I don't really often use Neo4j myself. So I know Cypher quite well, but like it's not that I personally use Neo4j in a project. So I don't know how to. Yeah, I don't really have anything to say about migrating MySQL to Neo4j.
All right.
Well, that's
Understandable.
interesting, actually. You, even though you're not an intense Neo4j user, you still shared the Cypher DSL project to the community. That's actually quite awesome.
Yeah, of course.
That makes it even more awesome, right? Great. So let's see. There are a few comments here and there. And yeah, I'm going to highlight one comment. It's not actually a question, but I have a question related to that in stock. So I'm just gonna take the opportunity. So it has, so David Winter, as you know, asked the first question. So David Winter from YouTube. Thanks a lot, David, for participating. And yeah, so I will just highlight the last part of the comment. I'm sure I will find something relevant in the Graph Academy. And it's kind of funny because before the stream started, we were talking about Graph Academy. And so, yeah, so for those who don't know, Graph Academy, you've got free trainings, basically, free self-paced courses in various topics, including application development. And it's been updated recently in the last month, so you've got quite up-to-date content there. However, so we have Go, we have Java, we have .NET soon, and we have some others, Node.js as well, but we don't have PHP yet. And so yeah, we were actually chatting about that before the stream started. So maybe something will happen soon. We'll see what happens, and we'll see how we can make it happen. But I think it would be great, personally, if we had a PHP course as well, especially since the work that Glenn has been doing is, I mean, in terms of concept, etc., it's quite aligned with the official drivers. So the course would be very similar. Maybe we'll have a few extra modules to talk about Cypher DSL, to talk about Laravel integration, etc. And that final bit, I mean, I'm cheating, I'm just going from question to question, but talking about Laravel, Symfony, etc. So how does it work today? Like, I'm a PHP developer, I know Laravel or I know Symfony, and I want to use Neo4j. So where do I go? What do I do?
Yeah, I can take that one because it also ties into, I believe, I'm going to pronounce this so wrong. Is this Vijay Shinde? There was someone in the stream just mentioning, like, why are there so less people out there? I hope this community grows.
Yep.
I think we all do. That's why we're here. So yeah, that's one of the main reasons that we are working on these integrations, because I'm a very strong believer that PHP is not just a great language, but I think it also has one of the best ecosystems. And if it's not really integrated into these ecosystems, then you're going to have a hard time adopting, getting new users to adopt the technology, at least from the PHP side. So that's why we've been really working hard on these integrations with Symfony and Laravel. But because there is like this critical mass that we need to gather of people that are starting to using it, test it to get this feedback loop, they're both still in beta. So if you want to use the newest version of Neo4j, and if you want to get started with it within Laravel or Symfony, it's basically adding it to Composer and installing not just an actual version, but dev main or dev master. And then you'll get the newest features. And you'll find that if you were to find an issue and just post it, you'll probably have your answer and you might even see it fixed within a day. So that's really what we're trying to do here. So if you want to get started, you can get the older versions, of course. They'll work, but they'll be difficult. Some of them will find difficulty to get some support. Some of them will only work for version 3.5 as well. Only Neo4j 3.5, not the newest one, let alone Aura if you're using a cloud deployment. So we really recommend doing that. And I'm hoping that in a few weeks we can just release it and say, yeah, this is ready for production. That's so this is also an outreach for people. The best help you can provide to us is just use it and provide the feedback, and we'll do the rest. Or you can, of course, fix it yourself even better.
Nice. Does anyone want to add to that? All right, so moving on in that case. So I have actually a question, a naive question, naive on purpose, because I heard these kind of questions with the Java equivalent. But so let's say I'm a beginner with Cypher. Does using Cypher DSL, so Cypher DSL project for PHP, does it mean I can just skip the Cypher learning part and start using the DSL and that will just work out, or what's your opinion on this? I mean, I will specifically ask Marijn, of course, but if you have opinions as well, you can answer.
Right. So the Cypher DSL is purposely quite low level. So I think you don't have to learn the exact syntax of Cypher, because the Cypher syntax can be quite complicated if you have a really large query. But you do still need to learn the constructs that come with Cypher, like having a relationship to a node and having a path of nodes, having properties on a relationship or on a node, and having a label. So I think the Cypher DSL is probably more meant for library developers like Glenn that want to make an abstraction on top of Cypher, instead of end user using the DSL in their project to build a graph query or to build a Cypher query. Because for 99% of those projects, it's just easier to write out an entire Cypher query and plug in some variables instead of having to build up a query incrementally, which is what you do want to do if you want to build an abstraction, of course, but that's not really useful for an end user that just wants to display a list of users on a website.
Yeah, I think that's like an interesting one. Is what's essentially the difference between a DSL and a query builder? Because it took me a minute to really figure out if there is even a difference or something like that.
I don't think there's a real difference. The only reason I call it the DSL is because there's a Java and a Cypher that implementation that also called the DSL, but it's pretty much a query builder.
Interesting.
Nice. Yeah, super interesting. And so, by the way, what's your story regarding Cypher DSL, Glenn? Because I remember you mentioned it. Yeah, I don't even remember when exactly. But how did you encounter Cypher DSL?
It's a good question. I encountered it just by lurking the forums. So I'm a frequent PHP subreddit lurker. So I think that's how I found it, and I got really excited because I was really stuck on well, not stuck is the wrong words, but the newer version of Neo Eloquent, which we're working on, isn't really only down to the Eloquent layer, but it goes even a little bit deeper. It's really into the query builder as well. And that made it really difficult to really structure all the queries, because the entire query builder and the way it handles what Laravel calls it grammar, but there's like this class that essentially translates the query builder to a string, to SQL originally. And there are some assumptions being made if I want to change it to Cypher that don't really match up with the language. Like, for example, there might be a where query that just has a subquery in there in SQL. But if you want to do the same in Cypher, you need to have the call query before the where, so it becomes out of order. And that's when stuff really became complicated. And just having an object representation in DSL, in the DSL, makes it, I wouldn't say trivial, but at least a lot more reasonable to think about of how to structure and move these parts of the query so they match. So that's what made it really powerful for me as a library developer.
Cool. Yeah, thank you. So thanks Reddit for the discovery, and thanks Marijn for convincing, for the quality of the work you've done. It seems to have worked out with Glenn, and I'm sure it will work out with many others.
Yes. Yeah, I would like to add to that indeed that it's a really a really high quality library. It's going to be difficult to find some that are better just from a theoretical perspective. Like, it's really well structured. They went really down to the minutia of discussing what's possible, how these rules should work out, and yeah, it was overall a really nice experience working with Marijn and the team.
Thank you. I just wanted
Nice.
to add on it. So like,
Yeah.
the DSL, I specifically made the DSL. So there are some other DSLs out there, or some other query builders for Cypher, but those are not only incomplete, they also, that frustrated me really, is that they really lack IDE hints, so like static analysis hints. And so I specifically designed the DSL to work correctly with IDEs and provide appropriate hints. So when you are building your query through interfaces, the IDE will know what kind of type this object is. So if it's a Boolean, you can call different functions on that Boolean to further construct your query, which is, I think it's really cool.
Nice. I mean, when I remember PHP from more than 10 years ago, that IDE assistance was very, very lacking compared to, I don't know, of course Java, for instance, or any statically checked language. But I'm impressed by I was curious. I picked a little bit into the Neo4j client code base just by out of curiosity, and seeing these type hints, etc. Man, that's much better than it used to be. Really, that's really, the language has evolved so much. Great. So yeah, everyone, use Cypher DSL if you can, if it makes sense, especially for complex queries. As far as I understand, it's really, really, really useful. So don't just trust their words and try it and give feedback. That's true for all the projects represented here. Use it and give feedback. All right. So we have probably a bit more than 10 minutes. So we have still time for some more questions from the audience. Or I can improvise some more while the audience is actively brainstorming for questions. So let me see. So one general question that is not necessarily tied to Neo4j. So for Neo4j, if you want to use it in the cloud, these days you can use Aura DB, right? You just use it, get there, you've got Aura free, and then you can have a starter experience of using Neo4j provision for you, and you don't have to worry about it. So what's the story for PHP these days? Like, if I want to deploy an app to the cloud, where do I go usually? Where would you go? Then that applies to everyone, of course. So what's your take on this? Okay, everyone is shy. I cannot.
I can't say.
I think most of us just work on servers, probably, right? Or are there anybody using the cloud right now of us?
Yeah, I'm using Google Cloud and I'm using Kubernetes actually, but it's not. There is no de facto way to do PHP in the cloud, right? I don't know if you're referring to something specific or some sort of an equivalent in Java that exists or any other language per se.
I guess I was thinking like a platform as a service, like Heroku or this kind of offering, like. But it seems I guess Glenn hinted at it, like maybe it's not as common as with some other technical stacks, I guess. So
I did check out just a day or two ago Laravel Vapor. I don't know if anybody has heard of that one. Maybe
Yes.
Did you use it?
I've never used it myself, unfortunately, but it does provide this kind of cloud, and now they're going into more of a serverless experience where you don't really have to configure anything. You just run your entire code base through an endpoint, and you expose it like through an HTTP call as a function. Like, you just call that, your entire code base is there, you call a specific route, you call a specific feature in your code, and the entire experience is seamless. And recently, in a recent Laravel conference, someone presented a cloud function, or they call it Lambda Functions in AWS and Cloud Functions in Google Cloud. Someone presented it where your entire code base is living inside a Lambda function. It can be in the sense where it's always running and you visit that through an endpoint or through a gateway and you go there, or you can just have it running in per call, like it triggered by a call from a queue or from another kind of trigger. So things are developing in that area, but I have never seen similar to what they have for Node.js, for example, for Golang, for Java, they have environments where you can just push your code entirely and they would handle everything from there. But as far as my experience has been with PHP, and recently, you can just build a Docker image for your code and put it anywhere, and it would just run the same as it would locally.
Yeah, I think PHP, the design also makes it a lot easier to deploy in that regard, just because it's, as far as I understand, if it's Node.js, it's like one application that handles all the connections, whereas in PHP, it's always only the application lives from the moment an HTTP request comes in and it ends the moment a response is emitted. So they are really small programs. So if you, for example, get like something like Nginx in front of that, you can easily spin up like hundreds of these processes ready to listen for incoming connections. So that's the way it really scales, and I think that's why the need for serverless and stuff like that might be a lot lower than other applications, other languages. But I might be wrong.
Interesting. Any others want to add their perspective on that, or shall I move on?
Yeah, I can add
go ahead,
something.
Michal, yeah.
I am usually using a typical web hosting or virtual private server, and also I am used to use Apache, not Nginx. Apache is always running on my computer as a service, and the Neo4j in this way, it's really easy to install also the community version on virtual private server. It's not a big deal. You just if you have some Ubuntu or something similar, there is usually a package in repository manager, very easy to install. And also you can anytime connect to the Abra, which is great. I already used that many times because you don't have to install anything, just one click and we are there, which is really, really great. And I wanted to add one thing. I also have experiences with building a public server with Neo4j instances and cluster and some certificates, because while developing the ball driver, I had to test that with something, and in that time there was no Aura, which led me to making my own instances of Neo4j and experimenting with all the kinds of stuff you can do there with the server of Neo4j, which is sometimes not very easy. Mostly building the cluster is very complicated sometimes. But usually you don't have to do that. It's really easy to install what is prepared and just use it. It's really easy.
So actually, you gave me the perfect occasion to transition to another question. So thanks for that, Michal. So how does it look like nowadays with regards to testing? Like I have a PHP application that talks to a Neo4j database or a Neo4j cluster. So how do you, and I will keep it vague enough, how do you test it? Whatever test means, just translate it the way you want, just interpret it the way you want.
Usually I use PHP unit and they have like a setup and teardown stuff like that. I just, in the setup, I just clear out the database completely with a match delete query. And I just hope it wasn't connected to the production database. That's the way I do it. I'm sure there are lots of better ways than that, but that's the way it works when I develop it at the moment.
I see. That's interesting. Yeah, Michel, go ahead.
About the tests, the Bolt library is covered in PHP unit test. It has GitHub actions and it's all automatized. Hard word. Sorry for that. And also Glenn, which have the PHP client, it's also covered in test, and he also runs the test kit from Neo4j. It's some image or container. I'm not sure. I'm not experienced with that. Maybe Glenn will say more about that.
Yeah,
But
so
the library, I would like to finish. The library itself is covered with the test. How you will test the final queries which you have is up to you usually. Yeah, Glenn, go ahead.
yeah, so test kit really is because we're trying to be so in line with the official drivers. The official driver team thought of a solution to ensure feature parity between all the languages. So they developed this kind of protocol as a JSON API that requests that sends requests to a server. For example, create a session, run this query, return me these results. And if you want to test it in your language, you need to implement the server essentially that receives these requests. And once you've implemented the server, the test kit just sends thousands of requests trying all these edge cases that are defined by the driver team. So that's essentially what test kit is. How we've tested it.
I can even add to that as a drivers team member. So indeed, it's both a protocol to communicate the interactions you want the test kit wants to drive from your driver. It's also, as Glenn mentioned, basically a suite of tests. Like there are many tests covering many different areas. Expecting results. So that's how we try to get consistency, right? We have try to adopt the same series of tests so we get the same results regardless of the driver. And so one thing that's worth mentioning is the core of it, like standing up a Neo4j database or cluster, is basically based on Docker. So it all relies on Docker under the hood, and that's also a job of testkit at the moment. It might change in the future, but testkit also stands up different topologies of Neo4j deployments as well before. So it starts Neo4j, it starts your testkit backend, so your own server that you wrote that understands the orders that testkit gives you. And then basically it runs a test, which are a sequence of of orders it gives you. Then you gives the answer back based on what your driver does, etc., etc. But that's based on Docker, really.
Yeah, speaking of Docker, by the way, I'd like to add just my 2 cents with experience about my experience with Docker and Kubernetes specifically. If anyone is using Kubernetes to host their applications, it is extremely easy to launch even a cluster of Neo4j. That's at least how we do it. So basically, we have a test environment, and from the operations part of the Neo4j documentation, the official one, there's an official Helm chart, which is an operator that can launch with very little YAML configuration. You can launch a cluster of Neo4j in a Kubernetes environment. And that's basically how we do it. It takes, I would say, less than a minute in the worst case scenario, up to a minute to have the cluster ready to run your application tests. So that's how we test against actual database and an environment and launch it very quickly.
Nice. And by the way, Marijn, I'm curious, how do you test Cypher DSN in general? What's your approach for that project?
Right. So for testing the Cypher DSL, I use PHP unit, of course. It's pretty much the standard for PHP at the moment. So I think there are about 1,000 unit tests and like 2,000 assertions covering most of the PHP Cypher DSL. I think there's like 95% coverage or 90% coverage. But I also use infection testing, which is a little bit more niche, so that applies some AST transformations to your code and then runs your tests again to see if your tests still fail, or as to see if your tests fail after the AST transformation. So that kind of tests your unit tests, sort of.
Nice. Yeah, it's rarely mentioned, but yeah, that's actually awesome that you use that in an actual concrete project. That's pretty cool. And do you have some integration test with Neo4j? Just to test the query you generate, or how do you do in general?
I don't have any integration tests, but it's actually quite a good idea. So I think we should probably work on adding those. But it's currently just unit tests, and I write my test. I write a valid cipher query and then test if it's if my DSL produces that valid cipher query. So, but like testing if it's still compatible with the latest Neo4j version, that would definitely be an improvement.
So reaching out to the community again. That's if you want to contribute to Cypher DSL, maybe helping with the end-to-end test part would be actually quite welcome. So don't be shy. Try to engage on the repo, and I'm sure Marijn will be happy to guide you and everyone else also with their projects. So contribution opportunity right here, I think. All right, so we are past the hour. So I wanted to thank all of you, but you know what? I'm just gonna end with one question, if I can find it again. See if you give me 1 second, because I'm moving my screens a little too much. Yeah, maybe as a kind of conclusion. So what's each of you? This one is for each of you. What's the number one feature that you're missing, from the Neo4j PHP ecosystem? Really, what do you think your number one feature missing would be, if any? And I will let you. So the first one, who wants to be first, and giving time for others to think about it.
I have a really boring one that I still have to fix. That's bookmarks. So that's in the driver. When I was at Graph Connect, were explaining it to me, and I think for more complex deployments, it's really important. So bookmarks are a way of ensuring that the data is consistent between different servers. So if you have like a high availability setup and you write to one server and then you might read from a different server that doesn't have that data yet. And if you want to make sure that this data is consistent, that if you run a read query on another server, and you want to make sure that it actually contains whatever you created in a previous query, you're gonna need bookmarks for that. And that's like one of the final implementation that's missing from being an official driver to be completely in line with the official drivers. So yeah. Boring but useful, like the good kind of boring.
Yeah, we take it for granted, but it's one important part of the official drivers, indeed. Who wants to go next?
Maybe I can go. I'm not sure how boring this one is, but it's more of a strengthening the browser version of the client, the Neo4j client, to be closer to what Neo4j Bloom offers. It's somewhere in between. Bloom is advanced. You can do a lot with Bloom, and you can do, of course, everything at the basics and the essentials with the Neo4j browser client. I always wanted to, for example, have some tags or categorize certain clusters, or make it easier to deal with the data that is in the database. It's because, when working with several clusters or subclusters of the nodes on the browser, and you have so many relations and so many nodes, things can get a little complicated. So to be able to organize and categorize the data without having to go right into Bloom all the way, maybe somewhere in between.
Yeah, very interesting. Thank you. Thanks for sharing, and I will be sure to forward that to the team, to the browser team in general. Cool. So, who wants to go next, or shall I volunteer someone?
No, I'll go next.
Oh, all right. Go ahead.
So it's not really something that's missing, but something that isn't complete yet. The Cypher DSL, of course. Although most features are in there, we still miss a lot of functions, and even some clauses are missing. So that's probably one of the major things that are still missing in the Cypher DSL. So if you want to contribute to the Cypher DSL, you can add new functions, and it's easy to do. It's just implementing a super small interface. It's pretty much just adding a function name, and that's it, and basically and some types for the arguments. But that's probably what I'm still missing from PHP and Neo4j.
Awesome, awesome, and yes, as you said, please try to contribute. It's not as hard as it looks when you never contributed before. Just try, just ask questions, and maintainers are always, I mean, almost always helpful. It's very rare that it's not the case. So don't don't be shy. Just try, and that's gonna work out. Cool. So Michal, you will conclude the stream. So what are your thoughts on the number one missing feature in Neo4j/PHP?
Um, I'm not sure if there is something missing because I feel it's like perfect.
Of course, of course it is.
At the beginning, I had the issue with the communication because the HTTP was slow, but I solved that with my Bolt driver. And in all my projects where I use Neo4j, I am working with a single instance. I am not using a cluster anywhere. I didn't have to deal with these routing tables and everything, which is great. I think I avoided some problems maybe, but I believe there is. I remember communicating with Glenn a few times when we were dealing with routing tables and clustering and this stuff, and it was really mind blowing. Because sometimes you just don't know what's going on and trying to figure it out. Yeah, it was funny. We spent some interesting time on that, but fortunately, yeah.
Sorry, I was just adding that the routing and SSL problems were the main interesting ones we've encountered.
Yeah, but I as I said, I am using a single instances in my projects, and it's really easy to use, and it has everything you need. You just run the database and you just connect with Bolt driver or PHP client, and you just start using that. There is nothing else you need because it's a database. What do you need? You just need to communicate with the database and store the data there and get the data, read them, and that's what you have. It's perfect, and the way how the Neo4j works, that's something amazing because in some moment I was working with or analyzing the optimizer of Neo4j. Because in the past, when I was working with my SQL databases, I was spending a lot of time with optimizing queries. And I was working in one company at that time, and I was really good at that. And everybody from that company who had problem with SQL query came to me to help him to improve that query. And when I was using the Neo4j, I had these thoughts. Maybe I'm writing the query in wrong way. Maybe there is a better way how to write this Cypher query. And I was thinking a lot about improving Cypher queries. And in some moment, I decided to just test different kinds of queries, the same queries, but in different write types. Like write this first and then request the condition, and just to change the order of this stuff in Cypher query. And you can profile the queries in Cypher in Neo4j, they have this great Neo4j browser, and you can use this profiler, and it creates this very nice structure with all these informations you need. And I was really impressed because every query which had the same result had the same optimization. The query optimizer in Neo4j is so good. You don't have to think about optimizing your own query because the optimizer will do it for you so great. It's like, it's so easy to use it. I really love it. And
Perfect. Yeah, go ahead, please.
and after all these years, maybe one thing what was really curious when we were working with Neo4j, it was related to the Glenn. He discovered that problem. He discovered few problems. He's good at revealing problems. It was in bolt communication. There is the communication with database is using a messages. It's like a function or something, and there is two messages: pull and discard. And in these messages, you are working with the result from the last executed query. And the Neo4j somewhere in the past they added a parameter for these messages, and it's a number of like records you work with. And the Glenn discard, we were thinking you just pull like 5 records, you discard 3 records, and then you pull the rest of the records, for example. But it doesn't work that way. And this will be nice if it works that way, because it will make more sense.
It will be built-in pagination. It would remove the need for skip and limit, and I believe they're working, or they are at least discussing it, or were discussing.
Yeah.
Maybe some more.
We are looking into it. I can confirm. I cannot promise any deadline, like when it's going to be fixed, but I can tell you, yeah, we've looked into it at least. So yeah, stay tuned, and thanks for the for the love speech, Michal. So yeah, just yeah. I guess Michal will run marketing from now on. I mean, Neo4j is perfect. That's the conclusion. Neo4j is perfect. The only bug is with discard, and it will be fixed at some point. So that's all you have to take away from the whole hour. So, I mean, thanks all of you, really, because without you, the PHP community for Neo4j would be in a much different shape. And that's true, that's true today, that's been true. I know some of you were involved for a long time, so some of you more recently, but regardless, you've made the PHP community as it is today. So it's thanks to your efforts, and we are glad to help any way we can, from Neo4j. And of course, it's just gonna get better and better, from there. I'm pretty sure the situation will keep improving. As Glenn, Abed, and everyone else said, yeah, there will be more usage, more feedback, more contributions. That's all we can hope for the PHP projects we talked about here. And so yes, try it away, try the projects away, try them, give feedback, contribute if you can. That's just the only way we can make the community grow, the usage grow, and yeah, the more feedback there is, the more the more stable the products become, and everyone is happier. So yes, again, I just improvised a very bad conclusion, but I guess I could not really beat Michal with his love speech to Neo4j. So just forget what I just said. Neo4j is perfect. We'll fix the one bug. Thanks for watching. So yeah, again, thanks everyone. Thanks. If you have not watched the live stream series on PHP Client we've done with Glenn, the replay is up. We'll probably post a recap soon as well. Otherwise, thanks for watching now or watching the replay, and I will see you all soon. And take care of you. Bye. Thank you.